Good morning, good afternoon to our colleagues across Indian country. It's great to be with you virtually again as we restart our Talk Shop series. Today's session will focus more on appraisals and various issues concerning that. We're limited to around 60 minutes for these types of sessions. That way it gives more of our colleagues time to participate, but also get on to some of their other tasks. So I encourage you, if you have questions or comments to share, that you try to, do so in a brief or succinct manner. That way our experts on the panel today, or those who are out in the audience, will be able to better help or better respond to your question or comment. A couple of rules before I turn it over to the NTLA board members to introduce themselves quickly and then to move on with some of the conversation pieces for today. If you have any questions or comments, you can put those in the chat box, or you could raise your hand. Everyone is on a forced mute, so you have to raise your hand, and then I will prompt you when called upon to unmute your microphone. So it will get there, so please, as we move forward with this, keep that in mind. This is recorded, so for those of you who just logged on and didn't hear the message, this is recorded and then will be shared on the our Vimeo account and dispersed to those who are part of this conversation today. And then again, I already said something, but just be mindful of some time. Sometimes when we really get talking about maybe our question or comment, I'm included in this. I'm doing it right now. I go too far sometimes. So, just be mindful of some of the time that we have together because we all do, in fact, cherish it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this conversation over to our NTLA board members. I'm going to go with the first person on my list here, Sarah Lawson. If she's here, she can introduce herself and then pass it on to some of our colleagues.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Rubidoux Lawson. I am a board member on the National Tribal Land Association's board. I am an attorney with Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt in Seattle, Washington, practicing federal Indian law and tribal law with an emphasis in all things related to Indian trust land. I do need to give my disclaimer. My colleague on the board, Brenda Tamaris, who's also an attorney, is not on the call today, but I do need to say that even though I am an attorney, nothing on this call today is legal advice. My presence on this call today does not create a lawyer-client relationship. No one in this room is one of my clients. With that, I will turn it back over to Nick to call on the next victim.
Let's see, my next victim will be the next person in line here, Karen Woodard.
All right, good morning, everybody. I don't know if you're having a morning like I am, but if you work in a realty department, you know how it's like. You've got 6 different things going on as soon as you walk in the door. Anyway, so I'm Karen Woodard again, Realty Administrator for the Morongo Band of Mission Indians, tribe in Southern California. Pacific Region is our regional office. Southern California Agency is our agency office. Morongo Realty contracts the realty title function from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, so we manage all of that in-house, as well as we oversee the appraisal services. So if you have questions about your processes for appraisals or contracting appraisals, be happy to discuss that with you all.
Thank you, Karen. Russell, are you around?
I am. My name is Russell Bellamy. I'm an NTLA board member. I am the field inspector for the Osage Nation Real Estate Services Department, as well as the GIS coordinator for the Osage Nation.
Thanks, Russell. And I think the only other board member we have on the call today is Katie Yates Free. She is.
Hello, I work with Russell Bellamy. I am a realty specialist for Osage Nation. We as well work under a compact with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We assumed the real estate function, as well as we recently acquired the appraisal services as well. We contract those out. I concentrate mostly in the surface leasing, so I'm looking forward to this, and I'll answer any questions and definitely open to suggestions on expediting appraisals. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. All right, well, with that in mind, now we'll turn our attention to any opening remarks that some of the board members will have about our appraisals and maybe any updates that might be there. And of course, as this process continues, I encourage our participants to begin putting in comments or questions that are really burning that you need answers to. So let's hear them. So whoever on the board would like to start, take it away.
I'm sorry, I was distracted, Nichlas. What was that?
Oh, all I said is, who'd ever like to start with some opening comments about today's appraisals session, to go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Well, I'm curious how many tribes out there are actually contracting their appraisal services, because I know the appraisals are a very slow process in Indian country. So we found that 6 months to a year waiting for an appraisal was very difficult when you're doing a transaction. So we decided to contract that function.
I know that Muckleshoot Indian tribe in the Seattle area had contracted that function probably in 2008 or 2009. And I know that simply because I used to be the trust services director for the tribe, and I was the one who led the charge on compacting, because I was tired of having to wait for appraisals to get done through our OST office. Well, I guess it's now called AVSO.
AVSO, yeah.
Yeah, to put to have BIA request the appraisal and put it in Oasis, and then have AVSO end up contracting out to an appraiser that is down the road from us. So we can do that directly on our own. There's no need to involve a middleman, essentially. So we contracted probably the tribe contracted probably 2008, 2009.
Here at Osage, we contracted, we took the appraisal function as far as just working with our own contractors. Back in 2019, we had no heads up that I believe, and don't quote me, one of the employees for OST said basically AVSO kind of got gutted staff-wise, their budget. We went from having 3 dedicated appraisers and reviewers at Eastern Oklahoma region to they said they have 3 reviewers for the entire state of Oklahoma. So we were catching up from when we compacted back in 2016. We were ordering appraisals 6 months in advance, actually getting people money on time for the first time. And then they hit us with that in April. We were able to come to an agreement and include it in do an MOU in October of 2019. We have successfully found 3 different companies to contract with locally and 1 out of Texas to do the appraisals. Our issue now is the bottlenecking at AVSO on reviews back. So I have currently 183 appraisals sitting at AVSO for Eastern Oklahoma region, waiting for review. Some have been there since 2020. They're about to time out. I don't know, they're effective of that date. So we're really kind of desperate to find a way to either get around the review process, or we've actually started advocating for a fair market analysis.
Yeah, that seems to be the bottleneck here in the Pacific region as well. We only have 1 reviewer. So those are out there that, I don't know how much experience you have in the appraisals, but once we have the appraiser do the appraisal, we have to upload it into the OASIS system, and then we have to wait for AVSO to assign somebody to review that appraisal. But we're having the same difficulty. They're not, for some reason, we can't keep appraisers, or we're really in a retirement mode, which makes it really difficult because we don't have new appraisers coming into the field. So we're also talking to our region about doing, for like residential leases, doing a fair market rental value that can cover the whole reservation rather than having to do each individual one. AVSO is very on board with that. They like that idea. Gregory Powell is our regional, I think he's out of Albuquerque. Him and Chuck LaFlame, who's our regional reviewer, are very on board with that because they don't think the appraisals, especially for land sales on reservations or for residential leases, it's not like we're selling houses, every day. It's not like, the state of California, they've got transactions going on, multiple, gazillions of them every day. So our land values don't change that quickly. They don't change within a year, like some appraiser, some areas do. So we're working with them on that. And I'm just curious if there's any other regions, anybody in a different region that perhaps is already doing that, and what they had to do to get their Bureau of Indian Affairs to approve it. Anybody up in your region, Sarah?
Sorry, Karen. Can you repeat the question?
Are you having one of those mornings too?
Yes, everything's on fire.
Yes. Yes, I've been putting them out since 7 o'clock this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just saying that we want to do a mass appraisal for land values and for fair market rent, because for residential leases, I mean, there are on a reservation, they don't change that drastically like they do in some off-reservation areas.
Right.
So I was curious if anybody, our region, Gregory Powell, who's our AVSO, is very on board with this plan, especially because we don't have that many appraisers working at AVSO. We have a lot that are retiring. We don't have new ones coming up.
Yep.
So we're trying to get our bureau to understand a fair market appraisal process, which seems to be, kind of, stopped. They want an appraisal for every single transaction. So I'm curious if anybody if there's anybody that's on this call, perhaps in another region, that has done that, a fair market evaluation.
Like a mass fair market value.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen that happen up here in the Northwest region. I will say that we definitely feel your pain in terms of retirements within AVSO. Rena Sanford, who was the head of our AVSO for years, retired just last month. And so, we need surveyors and appraisers.
Yeah, badly.
I will say though, that just off the top of my head, and I would need to go back and actually take a look at the regulations. I know that there are provisions in Part 162, the leasing regulations, that say that the tribe can produce and I'm sort of riffing off of memory here, but it's to the effect that the tribe can produce a fair market value appraisal or some other valuation method. So I would probably look that up and cite to that when I'm dealing with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and say, look, we can either do a fair market value or we can do some other valuation method, and we are choosing to do this mass fair market value valuation method. And so it's supposed to be deferential to tribes in determining values like that. So right. I'll take a look for that citation right now for you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Do we have anything from our group out there? Sorry.
Yeah, no need to be shy.
Nope, don't be shy. This is the whole reason we're here.
Yeah, you could go to reactions on the bottom of your screen, and you can click raise hand if you'd like to have a little chat with us.
How many participants do we have, Nick?
We have 40 in the room right now.
40 in the room. There's got to be somebody out there with wanting to discuss something in the appraisal world.
So no one on this call has any other means of an appraisal process than the one that we are all struggling in? Because that's why I was really hoping somebody somewhere has been making headway and I can, model that, package it up neat and be like, please bless this.
Yes.
I can hop in real quick. I have that citation for you. So 162.322, that's for residential leases. I'm guessing it's 422. So 162.422 for business leases, because they tend to be exactly similar, just 100 points apart. But that provision says we will use a market analysis, appraisal, or other appropriate valuation method to determine the fair market rental for residential leases of individually owned Indian land. We will also do this at the request of the tribe for tribal land. So you can use a market analysis, an appraisal, or some other appropriate valuation method. And I think that if the tribe is going to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and saying, we want to use this valuation method for this business lease or for this residential lease, the regs are intended to be deferential to tribes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we do have some hands up now too. The first one that came up is Jared Hall. Ask him to unmute him.
Yeah, hi. Our tribe's located in Southern Oregon here, and we obviously were a tribe restored without a land base, and so we have minimal land holdings in trust status. So technically, when we talk appraisals, I think we're talking two different things, because with land transactions, it kind of depends on the funding source. If we have tribal unrestricted funds, we don't necessarily have to get an appraisal for a transaction. We do sometimes in certain instances. But you guys are more talking about once the land is transferred into trust, and you're talking to a company about leasing a piece of land, or a fiber optic company want to cross tribal land and seeks a right-of-way permit. Those type of appraisals need to go through obviously the Code of Federal Regulations on leasing and being permitted to cross tribal land. So I'm a little confused. You guys aren't talking about when we're trying to go buy a piece of land or a big piece of timberland, trying to go through the BIA to get an appraisal for that land, because it's never been followed for the 30 years we've been restored as a tribe in that sense.
Yeah, you're correct, Jared. Yeah, we are talking about allotments, tribal trust lands. But the tribe there are a lot of tribes that do purchase fee property to bring it into trust status.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to find BIA funding to do that. They don't like to do fee parcels because their appropriations are for trust lands, be it allotted or be it a tribal trust land. So a lot of times tribes have to go out and hire their own appraiser just for the transaction. If they have to take it to their general membership for approval or that type of thing, they have to show what the appraised value is.
Yeah, and we also been kind of notified. We have some possible settlement funds from some federal, I guess, litigation lawsuits with tribal treaty resources, and the discussion's been around in order to spend those funds on buying fee simple land, we may have to follow a yellow book appraisal in order to stay in compliance with spending federal funds to buy land. And I guess all federal agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and a lot of them around here, they have to follow that appraisal process. But we were just talking about that. But my one other question is on a right-of-way permit, because we have done some right-of-ways for line service agreements, like building a fitness center or a childcare center. And so we had to apply through the right-of-way process and get that approved through the BIA. But I don't recall getting an appraisal for those, because the line service agreement is to service our assets. And so charging a utility company an appraised value for the land that they're going to use for the right-of-way seems kind of counterproductive, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
To try to charge them on top of that when they're already, we're already trying to keep costs down just to get the line service hooked up so we can tie into the system and get power to our community assets. So I was a little confused, because I think the right-of-way talks about some of that stuff, the right-of-way procedures. from the BIA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is something I've been eyeballs deep in the last 48 hours. So with rights of ways and service line agreements are sort of a subpart to the rights of way regulations. The rights of way regulations are in part 169. Service line agreements are a subpart in subpart B of 169. And there's the use of service line agreements is supposed to be very limited. When you read through the regulations, it's, an authorized user can do a service line agreement to have utilities extended to their site. So by authorized user, they're talking about, whoever the owner of the land is. So if it's the tribe, then it's the tribe. If it's fractionated land, you're talking about a lessee who has a valid Indian Affairs lease or Hearth Act lease on the property, who's going to go, for example, build a house on the property. They can have a service line agreement or service line extended to the property. They don't need to go through the right-of-way process for that, just for that utility, that limited utility service under those regulations in subpart B. Subpart B, the service line agreements part, is specifically intended to basically help individual Indian landowners or sole landowners of property get utility service like a water line or an electric line or something like that to their property. And that's why it doesn't require a survey, an appraisal. They don't require Bureau of Indian Affairs approval. The regulations are really sparse in terms of what's needed for a service line, simply because they're intended to make the process easy for Indian landowners. Rights of ways, like if you if you spend time reading the rest of the regulations in part 169, specifically about rights of ways, those are really intended for large utility companies who are going to, for example, do a gas line that crosses the reservation, or a large electric distribution line that crosses the reservation. We do sometimes have to do them for, like, if a tribe is going to put a road in through a piece of property so that utilities can also get extended. The tribe might need a right of way, especially if you're talking about a fractionated allotment. But there's really a distinct difference between the purposes and the use of a right of way, which requires an appraisal, a survey, permission to survey, a legal description, bonding, insurance, BIA approval. Like, the list of requirements for rights of ways is as long as your arm, versus service lines, which are intended to be very easy to just get utilities extended to a site. So, and it's to actually provide utility service to the site and not cross the site to provide the neighbor with service, for example.
Great. So we have another hand up here. Gabe Sneezy, I'm going to ask you to unmute your microphone now.
Okay, Nick, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Gabe Sneezy. I retired 31 years of service in the federal government. I was a national director in Washington, D.C. I'm the one that wrote the regulations that you see as far as appraisal in Part 162. I'm the one that wrote it. I'm the one that established the office before they took it to OVSO. I'm the one that built that stuff. I pulled it from BIA to OST. And we had good work back then. There was no bottleneck. The problem that you folks are having right now is OVSO. They have never done an appraisal on Indian lands. Those higher echelon people never done an appraisal on Indian lands. They don't understand the difference between public trust and fiduciary trust. They don't understand that. A fiduciary trust is what you folks are dealing with. You have a fiduciary trust to act on behalf of individual Indians. These folks up there in Washington, D.C. don't know that today. And it's an overkill in what they want. It is an overkill. I know Gregory Paul. Somebody mentioned his name. I used to be the boss back then. I understand that. There's ways to go around that. And the bad thing about it is they took it to OVSO, and those folks don't know nothing about appraisals on Indian lands. And when the reality is this, when the first use map came out, it was designed for banks. It wasn't designed for federal property. It wasn't designed for Indian property. It was designed for banks and home loans and commercial loan, things of that nature. And so as we went along, we tried to fit the, a square peg into a round hole. And we dealt with that. It was always about integrity in the process. Back when I was a director, we had 75% Indian people over there. You don't have that today. Right now, you have folks in charge that have never stepped foot on an Indian reservation. They don't understand that turnaround time has nothing to do with just residential leases. No, you got probates over there. Somebody's on their dying bed. 90 days is a probate process. When I was a director, our turnaround time was 90 days to make sure that we get things done. 90 days. And you can look it up on the internet under the Secretary's high-level implementation plans, what they used to call it. But those are progress we made. That's the problem right now. They turn it over to the wrong people that don't understand nothing. Real appraisal is a piece of
Gabe, we're having some issues with your audio.
Transaction.
Gabe, you're breaking up a little bit.
Archaeological surveys, environmental surveys. You got appraisals, you got realty requirements. Yes, people don't understand it. Let me just make it up. I can move it. Can you hear me now? Nick?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Nick, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the problem that we have right now. They took it out of the wrong hands. Everything started from the Cobell. And these folks, when I first started the appraisal program, I had a training program. I had Indian folks in there, and we trained them. And we were the ones that were first made appraisers professionals. And the difference between OVSO and what we have now, they wanted the money. I'll tell you that. Appraisals is a line item in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's a line item. On the other side, no. All they did was take our money and took it and ran. And what they do is an overkill. It is an overkill. A lot of times, residential leases, when you go buy a home, you go to a broker. You don't get an appraisal. He'll just tell you what you need to, what the market commands out there. It's a parameter. And a lot of times, a lot of these transactions don't need a full-blown appraisal. They need a market analysis. And if you read 162, and it talks about agricultural properties, I'm the one that wrote that. And at first, they wanted me to, to write something like that. I told them, you can't do that. Markets have a tendency to check themselves. But with agricultural markets, you can do that. And so we limited that stuff. And the flip side, too, is that you don't want to depend on mass appraisals. I used to work over there. And a lot of times with this land buyback program, man, I tell you, one time I went to Oregon. They valued this thing as a commercial property sitting on the side of a mountain. And those folks over there that do mass appraisals don't go over there and look at the land. They go over there and they're not even appraisers. They're what they call appraisal support specialists. They collect the data and they feed it into a database, and it kicks out a value. You got one appraiser that signs off on it, but nobody looks at that land. And sometimes it's overvalued, sometimes undervalued. Most of the time it's undervalued. Because when you deal with agricultural property, you got to have water. You got to have water, and that gives it a lot of value. And the problem that we have today, when they say we don't have appraisers, bullshit. Spend that money, get on top heavy, hire some appraisers to go out there, because we deserve the same rights to our property as non-Indian. We deserve an appraiser to step foot on the ground, to look at everything. And this is a real heartburn with me. I'm retired right now. I'm retired, but I'll keep on discussing these things. I know those folks in DC. And and to me, I tell them, bring it back under the Indian side, because it's also what they call a conflict of functions, because you have Fish and Wildlife Services buying land up there in Alaska. you have Bureau reclamation going across Indian lands. It should not be just their appraisal. It should be appraisal from the landowner side. And I'll tell you a story. One time, when I was a director, my chief appraiser in Portland called me. He said, Gabe, we got a Northwest Gas going there. He says, there's a 60-mile right away. He said, the Northwest Gas, they provided their appraisal. He said, $50,000. And he said, I got this U.S. attorney breathing down my neck. He said, and he wants me to rubber stamp it. I said, no. I said, Anson, you tell him he needs to put up to D.C. and I'm going to handle it now. So I talked to that U.S. attorney. I said, no. I said, we do things the right way around here. And so, long story short, my deputy came out with $2 million. And then the Landowners Association came out with 2.6. What happened? They settled for $2.3 million, far cry from $50,000. So it's like the fox watching the hen house when you're dealing with ADSO. None of them have never done an appraisal out there. There's maybe a few, maybe Greg Powell. I know Greg. He used to work in Montana. Yeah, he did some Indian work over there. But the rest of them, in management, no. And a lot of these things can be handled outside the appraisal arena. It's you can handle on the realty side. Why do you need an appraisal request for a negotiated sale? They don't even have a buyer yet. You guys know that. They don't even have a buyer yet. They don't have the resources yet. Why do you need an appraisal? All you need is an analysis. And that's where the bottleneck is. I remember when I first took over that program, we had the inquiry from the Senate Affairs Committee. It was back in the 90s and early 2000s. And that is the same problem they had back there where tribes were saying they're losing economic money because the appraisal process takes too long. And so I work with GAO. I work with Judge Lambert under Cobell. And we got things running good. When I first took over that program, we were 5,000 backlogs throughout the United States. When I stepped aside in 2006, we got it down to 300. 300. And these folks don't know what they're doing. I would not trust anything ABSO does. And you have a right. Individual Indians have a right to ask for their own appraisal. That's a fiduciary trust. And that's the thing you guys got to understand. We have a fiduciary trust in Indian country. We have responsibility for an individual Indian. We have in Oklahoma. I don't know if any of you guys are from Oklahoma, but they got their own probate laws over there. They got to turn around 90 days. And me and the late director of that program, her name was Kathy Supernall.
Gabe, I had to mute you.
We worked together. She said, we got to turn these things on 90 people. We turned around in 90 days. And appraisals were.
Okay, Gabe, I had to mute you because you kept going out in this again, but thank you for your comments and your contributions. Well, I'll need to talk with you sometimes so I could pick your brain a little bit more about not only the creation of what you've been able to do, but some of your suggestions for creating a movement to maybe change some of these things too. So I'd love to be able to talk with you sometime, when some of the reception is maybe better and we have a little bit more time to do so. But thank you so much for your contributions today.
Perhaps we'll be at our upcoming conference, National Tribal Land Association.
Absolutely. It'd be a great place to connect with you and to actually meet you, Gabe. It'd be wonderful to do. We have another hand up. Let's see, Tim Crone, who is a local favorite. I'll ask him to unmute here.
When you were talking about right-of-ways, that prompted me to think of what we're doing here. First off, we have very few single landowner or lands with single owners. We are highly fractionated on the allotments. We have tribal trust land and we have a lot of tribal fee land. And the question I have is regarding the utilities the pass-through pipelines, power lines, et cetera, the main trunk lines that the branches go off of. And the question I have is, no, I haven't heard any talking about franchising of these utilities. Do any of you have any experience with that? And how that fits with appraisals and rights of ways and et cetera?
This is Karen, and unfortunately, I don't have any experience with the franchising. We have talks about taxation, considering that these transmission lines being, gas or electric, or transmitting gas and power, to major areas like Los Angeles, San Diego County, those types of areas. But we haven't dove into it quite yet. I know it's something that we're looking at. I also know that with appraisals, it's really difficult for appraisers. They don't look at what the throughput is, the number of households these lines are serving. They generally just serve it, or just appraise it as a land lease, which gives you pennies on the dollar. As for Morongo, that was not acceptable, especially for gas mains and electrical lines that were put out here under FERC regulations. We were never compensated for those lines. So we went back to the utility companies when those utilities expired, and we told them that we weren't going to accept the appraisal process with the AVSO, that we were going to do our own appraisal process, and that we were going to figure out what that throughput was. And we also want to know what the evaluation was to move them off reservation lands. So if we decided we didn't want them anymore, and you have to relocate them, what does that cost to the utility company? Which could be in the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that was a very good negotiating tool for us. And I don't mean to switch to right-of-ways, but appraisals on right-of-ways are a very difficult thing to do. And Sarah, I know you've got some comments on that.
Yeah, no, I've had sort of a similar experience where, when you go and you just appraise the square footage of the land that's being used by the right-of-way, it's going to be a fraction of what that utility company might be making off of whatever they're pushing through that line, if it's like an oil and gas line or electric utility or something like that. So you'll always want to, you can do the fair market land value, but you'll always want to look at other ways of valuing that right of way, whether it's, the money that the company is making with the good or service that they're putting through that line, or the build around cost. We had an electric utility line, a large electric distribution line that had that was on the reservation that had expired, and it had been built in the 1940s when the area was still largely rural. And in the 60 some years in between, the area was very much changed and was built up substantially. And so we knew that the cost for them to try to build around where this Indian allotment was going to be, very, very high. So we had that valued in addition to having, the actual electric rates that were, going through those lines. So in addition to having that valued, we had the build around cost valued, and the build around was very, very high. But there's, especially with the new rights of way regulations that came out 5-6 years ago, there's strong support for Indian landowners where these utility lines have expired, where these rights of way have expired. And I think the way the regs are drafted, they're really intended to put the Indian landowners in the driver's seat when it comes to either renegotiating those rights of ways or having them removed if that's what they want. And there's an interesting case out of Oklahoma, Davila versus Enable Midstream Partners, where an oil and gas company had a right of way that expired and they couldn't come to an agreement with the Indian landowners on renewal. And the landowner said, we want you to remove your line. And the federal courts agreed with the landowners and told the company that they had to just remove the line. So yeah, going back to valuations, look at something else other than just the land value. Look at some other way to value that right of way.
So you're talking basically about the utilities that pass through that don't service the reservation.
Mm-hmm.
My next concern is those major trunk lines that are within the reservation that service lines branch off of. Do we appraise those? Do we, they're within, many times they're within the road right away. This piggybacking rule that came about, we're under the impression that we have to get leases or rights of ways or land assignments or some tool that they have their own paper for their utility, and charging for that, they can charge, but then that's just a pass-through cost to the customer that's living on the reservation.
Yeah, and that's where it does get a little bit tricky, because if that line is in some way providing some service to people who live on the reservation, then the tribe might want to take that into consideration, and might also want to consider other types of compensation. So even if you do the valuation on, for example, build around cost, you don't have to set your foot in the sand and say, okay, we will only take build around cost. You have some leeway there in terms of, okay, well, the build around cost is this, but you're providing service to the reservation, but we want you to also do this other thing, which might not be a monetary payment. It could be an agreement to extend more utilities to more homes on the reservation within a certain period of time. It could be scholarships to tribal members, something like that, or internship opportunities with the company for tribal members. You can look at other types of compensation other than just straight money.
Mm-hmm. I know for some tribes, especially here in Southern California, they've even looked at becoming a paper utility. So they've participated in the upgrades to infrastructure, but that also allows them to either be able to wield power through those lines, or participate in the investment to, in the long term, get some of the contribution back in the long term. So there's different ways of thinking about it. You're going to really have to think outside the box when it comes to appraising a right of way. I think Katie had some comments on that. She don't know what happened, but she looked like she wanted to say something about. Here she is.
Okay, so whenever we talk about appraisals, Osage County or Osage Nation, we do we have the right-of-way companies do third-party appraisals. They provide them to us, and then we submit them to ABSO for review. I've come across one that definitely needs to be appraised, but it's bound by perpetuity. It is $50 a year, and I don't know how to break it. It was made back in like 1950. Anybody have any ideas?
Allotment, tribal trust?
It is an individual allotment.
For what type of right of way? Because like with oil and gas, they're limited to 20 years.
It is oil and gas.
Statutory authority says 20 years.
We have fought
Depends on the statutory authority of when it was approved.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have even debated the fact that they thought it was approved because it said assistant secretary, but you can't really read the name that's signed, but it's actually the assistant secretary of like the county courthouse, not the assistant secretary of the United States or of, Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Katie, you and I can talk offline.
Okay. Okay, cool. I love the perpetuity ones.
Thanks. Katie always has such wonderful questions. So you could always count on her to ask something that needs a lot more research too. So thanks, Katie, for your contribution. Of course. Next, we have another hand up. Judge Sally Willett. I want to ask you to unmute your microphone, and we have just a few minutes before we need to start wrapping some of this up. So here we go.
Hello?
Hi, we're here.
Oh, good. Are you all familiar with the Leona Gopher case? It was an IBIA decision. And what I can tell from what you're talking about is that you all are competent. And that the Leona Gopher case, Marcella Giles and I worked with the landowner. And what you actually have are a lot of reservation BIA staff that are in bed with the utility companies. Now, when you read this decision at IBIA, it is just sort of an extemporaneous, amorphic flight of fantasy. But what happened was that she had a 321, 25 USC section 321, 20-year oil pipeline right away. And what BIA did, I don't agree that the regulations are user friendly. I did extensive comments on it and stripped them down, and I'll be happy to provide those comments to anyone. I did them in color, I did them in PowerPoint. The problem is that they tried to renew her under the 48 Act, claiming that the 48 Act preempts the 1904 Act, which is 321. It does not. If you look at 25 USC section 326, you will see that nothing about the 48 Act was to modify, overrule, or in any way impair the rights of way laws that were enacted from 1899 until 1904. And I'm not including the Pueblo stuff. So what happened was that she ended up, they tried to charge her $3,000 for 120 pages of records. What they were doing was they were stonewalling her because they were continuing to build the Keystone during the Obama moratorium. And what happens, the reason why they're going for the 48 Act is that it has a 50-year lease term versus the 321 20-year lease term. And by doing that, they are violating Leo Krulitz's 5 Principles of Trust Responsibility from 1978 that I will be happily make available to anyone, which is that you're supposed to preserve value, increase value, and maximize value. So she essentially lost the case. And then Tara Sweeney, if you'll recall the Fort Berthold mess, where they had a nice appraisal for what were a determination of what they would give the landowners. And Tara Sweeney came in and used the Gopher case, which isn't worth the paper it's written on, to lowball them to get them down from millions of dollars down to just a fragment. So I think that there's, as Gabe pointed out, there's really systemic problems that should be addressed, and it should be looked at. I think GAO should look at it. They've done it before. GAO did a report. I can't remember the years, but they did it. And they said one of the big problems was the contract appraisals and people not having experience in what they were doing. But in Leona's case, she never got to see an appraisal. She never got to see any of the paperwork, and they stonewalled her all the way up to IBIA. And so I think that the problems you describe, if you're doing it right, as I detect that you guys are, it's one thing. But if you've got people in bed, which in Oklahoma, you're going to have that, also apparently at Blackfeet, you're going to have serious problems with the system that is basically violating the trust responsibility and engaging in conflict of interest. Here's something they're doing, and then I'll wrap this up quickly. They're not able to get, let's say, for example, you've got an undivided, you've got a right of way. They want a right of way across a fractionated allotment. They're taking undivided interest and they're making interest in severalty. A federal district court, and they're doing it through condemnation. They do not, the Supreme Court, no court has the authority, federal court has the authority to partition Indian land. So you are watching from a system of fractionated tenancy and common interest be switched to segregated rights of way through the mechanism of condemnation, in which there are two solicitors' opinions from the 1940s that say that condemnation is not appropriate for pipelines. And what I've seen is an abdication of due diligence on the part, well, the oil companies are just running amok, but an abdication of due diligence by the Department of Interior. So the problems are a lot larger. You've got practical problems. The systemic problem is much worse.
Thank you very much, Sally. You know, certainly you're so right about the systemic issues. You know, we have a lot. It's unfortunate that our existence has to be so complicated. You know, especially when there's so many others on this continent, non-natives who don't have those same complications. So I think, you know, it'd be nice to come up with some solutions and to create a movement with land staff and land professionals that could really start making some of these changes. You know, and do better by our nations. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
All right, we have maybe time for one more quickie. Is there a quick question out there, or concern or comment? Whoa, here's one of my personal favorites. Let's see, Linnea Jackson.
Good morning, everybody. So for those that don't know me, I'm the general manager for Hoopa Valley Public Utilities in Northern California. I'm finding that what we're running into is that as we're developing broadband, I think it's going to impact almost every single tribe within this country, because you're going to have, you know, updated tower leases, you're going to have fiber optics, you're going to have wireless connectivity. And so I think communications and right-of-ways and appropriate leases are going to be like huge in Indian country in the next, you know, like today it is. And so I'm struggling with, you know, having to look at an appraisal or a survey and a right-of-way for each individual property, you know, to get these fiber optics in, which largely makes projects not meet timelines. They're out of budget. People aren't even anticipating that. Large telecoms don't know how to operate within tribal lands and within that jurisdiction and understand the nuances with that. So I know we don't have very much time in this, but I really think that needs to be another topic with communications and right-of-ways, because it's going to affect every tribe across this country, like now.
Thank you, Linnea. I actually serve on the Native Nations Communications Task Force, which is with the FCC. And we're in the process of writing some tribal codes and talking about those different nuances so that these telecommunications companies can understand what it is to come into Indian country on a reservation, deal with the lottees, deal with tribal trust, right-of-ways, those appraisals. So I really appreciate your comments, because those will be very, very useful to the committee. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Wow, this has been a really, really great session. You know, I thought, you know, I woke up this morning thinking it was Friday. Imagine my surprise when I realized it was Thursday. And I have another day yet. And it's been good, but it's just been a long week. And so it may have been the same way for many of us on today's call, but while we started out pretty quiet, I really appreciate everyone's participation and the comments that you brought to this session. If you haven't registered for the 11th Tribal Land Staff National Conference, you can do so at ntla.info. ntla.info. You could register there. The early bird rate is $500. So you have a chance still to register at that rate. We're promising a very robust session this year. full of planning, full of various land management and acquisition topics. And for those attorneys out there, about 9 CLE courses. So we have a lot of great information in the program, and I look forward to seeing you all in person, even if some of us are masked up. So that said, this recording will be made online. You'll receive this in an email. In addition, you will receive an evaluation link that will ask you for other suggestions for talk shop topics. So we definitely want to know what it is you want to talk about. There's a lot of expertise on the NTLA board, a lot of knowledge to share, and they're certainly happy to do so. So many thanks to Sarah, Karen, Russell, and Katie for their participation, and of course our audience members who were able to make such meaningful contributions as well. We look forward to seeing you all next time.